Yep.
So we made some changes to the trailer, obviously, from the first videos. When we first started building the frame of the body, we had an idea of what we were going to do for the suspension and for the swing arm, and we did actually complete it that way, and we had some issues, so we made a few changes to it. The main change was really with the rear wheels, as you can see, and those rear wheels, we've decided to go with a 2 rear wheel system, and we considered a lot of options with it. The first option was doing some sort of complex, similar to what we have, but a really complex geometry with a swing arm that sat a little bit closer to push the tires forward farther, a shock that still leaned out a little ways, and then all these complicated levers and stuff. And we decided against that because of the complexity and the cost, most of the complexity down the road. We actually started off with using the regular swing arm that we had, putting an axle across, and then using these wheels and hubs and putting that across it. But the problem is the tires were so far back that A, the weight was way too far forward again, and then for turning, the thing just kind of tipped over because once you turn with the bike, there's just too much weight overhanging essentially. It's kind of like a sidecar setup. So another one we decided not to use that we considered was a torsion bar system. A torsion bar system is where you have usually a square tube of metal. There's rubber pieces inside of it, and then you've got a little arm hanging off it that goes up and down. The rubber keeps basically everything in there, and it's actually the suspension that the trailer would sit on. The issue with those that we didn't like is, one, they weren't positioned properly for what we needed, such as a forward-facing swing arm or a forward-facing torsion system, and more importantly, it had so little travel that it just would have put a lot of stress on the trailer and a lot of stress on our bikes. The issue with too much stress is that with a vehicle like a car and a trailer, if you have a suspension with very little travel and it's bouncing up and down, you feel it in the car, but a car is fairly heavy, so it's not usually a big issue. But something like this, where we have a fairly small motorcycle, 450 pounds with us, which, you know, fair enough, adds a couple 100 pounds because we're a little porky. Either way, the trailer weighs enough that with a short suspension system like that, that jarring and that hitting of bumps and stuff would have been too much. It would have transferred through the swing arm all the way into the bike, and you really would have felt it, and I think it could have made a potential dangerous situation. So that's really why we didn't use it. To be fair, we don't really need as much travel as we have on our wheels, but again, it's more for the softness and the pliability of the suspension that we have that. Alright, so this is our rear suspension system that we finally settled on. It's a fairly simple system, even though it looks complex. We reused a lot of the parts we had to save money and time and the effort to build them in the first place, such as these 2 pivot points in here are originally from the swing arm. This is actually the original swing arm, and we grafted it onto this tube. This tube's new, of course, and this tube wraps all the way around, as you can see. This is basically our swing arm, so when I push on this, you can see how it moves up and down. Obviously, the tires are connected on the end. The difference was we had to use these big braces to push it out and another big brace here to hold the shock. So as this goes up and down, the shock compresses and decompresses and everything works as normal. For the most part, this is a fairly simple system again, but it took a little fabrication to get right. It's just got 2 pivot points there, a pivot on the shock and an upper pivot on the shock here, and 2 wheels. So it's a pretty simple system. It seems to work well so far, but we'll find out. This upper shock mount is actually, it looks fairly complex, but it's not too bad. It's actually got these 4 pinch bolts, which actually hold this in place. But if you loosen these up, you can tighten and loosen this to raise and lower the suspension a little bit. And the whole point of this is if we add extra weight, such as we get a different wing or we get some different gear or something, and we have a little extra weight, instead of having to mess up your shock settings, because shocks, inherently, you can't change their length. They have a maximum length and a minimum length. That's eyelet to eyelet. And you can change the preload on them. That's these rings here. And all that does is stiffen the spring. It actually doesn't stiffen the spring, correction. It actually moves the spring up and down on its mount here. What that does is allow for more what's called preload. So you could add more weight, but this spring rate never changes. I'm not sure what this one is. And then, of course, the shock doesn't do anything as far as height or length adjustment. It just dampens. So the whole point of this was to add in a little bit of adjustability up here. That way, if we get on a road section, a long road section, we can actually we can lower it down, have a little more stability on sweeping corners and things like that. And then if we get off-road and we tend to be bottoming out a little bit, we can raise it up a little bit, get a little more ground clearance on it, but we still have that same pliability. We haven't touched the shock at all. All we did is move it here, and everything is hopefully kosher. But that's the whole point, is to have this thing set up so that simple adjustments like 4 bolts and a little set bolt here is all you have to do to raise and lower it a little bit for some extra gear, or just for different conditions, riding conditions, off-road, etc. So that's the rear suspension in a nutshell, and obviously this isn't painted yet. It will be, and we have to do actually a little bit of a fix, hopefully brace that up a little better, but otherwise it's pretty much done, and it's pretty much final configuration. So all the wheels are on, the wheel bearings, the wheel hubs, the whole works, everything is greased up, it's ready to go. So hopefully when we test it here in about a month, hopefully it'll work out good. So because of the changes in the rear with the 2-wheel system, obviously going from a single wheel to a rear wheel, or single wheel to a 2-wheel system, we had to change a few things up front. Originally, the trailer leaned with the bike, which means that there was a pivot point here that would allow this, in fact I can show you, it allows it to turn like this, but it didn't allow this to rotate. And the whole point was that as you lean the bike, the trailer leans with you. It actually worked really well, except there was a few issues going down the road with stability of the trailer, more or less. It had to do with the fact that this swing arm couldn't really be stiff enough to hold all this up. So we had to make some adjustments. Obviously the 2-wheel system, but with the 2-wheel system we had to add this big pivot point in here. This is actually a big spindle and a big bearing housing. There's bearings in here with grease and the whole works. There's seals in the back, and obviously this cap in the front. We've had to modify it a little bit. We shortened this up just a tad bit, and then we had to make this custom cap because the clearance on here is really tight. The whole thing is 9 inches long, and we shoved it into this little space, and these originally here and here were touching, and so we really only added about 2 inches. That's what this gap is. We added 2 inches by adding a 9-inch swivel. And to be fair, it works really great. If you watch when I move this, I'll pick this trailer up. The whole point is now when you lean the bike like that, the trailer doesn't lean, obviously. But the cool part is as you go around corners, you can lean into a corner and turn, and it still swivels like that. And you go around that way, and you go straight again. So this system works really well. It's a fairly stout bearing. It's got a bigger bearing and a smaller bearing in there. They're actually made for off-road vehicles. When you do a bumper or something like that and you want to add a tire to it, that's what they're for. But we used it for this application instead, and so far it seems to hold up really well. It's fairly sturdy when you push on the trailer. It doesn't really flex at all. There's a tiny bit of flex in there, but not bad. So I think it'll hold up pretty well.